What happens when the final breath leaves your body and your heart stops beating forever? Does consciousness simply vanish into the void, or does it embark upon the greatest journey of all existence? Welcome, soul traveler, to the Eternal Library, for today we dive into one of the most profound and enigmatic questions that has haunted humanity since the dawn of awareness itself: the continuation of consciousness beyond physical death. For millennia, this knowledge has been carefully guarded within the inner circles of Tibetan monasteries, Egyptian mystery schools, Hindu ashrams, and Sufi orders, passed down through oral tradition from master to disciple in hushed whispers beneath starlit skies and within sacred chambers where only the most dedicated seekers were permitted to enter. The ancient Tibetan text known as the Bardo Thodol, mistakenly translated as the Book of the Dead by Western scholars, is actually titled Liberation Through Hearing in the Intermediate State, and it reveals with stunning precision the exact stages of consciousness dissolution and reformation that every human being experiences at the moment of death and beyond. But this is not merely philosophical speculation or religious dogma. This is a detailed roadmap of consciousness itself, compiled over centuries by yogis and lamas who had mastered the art of conscious dying and rebirth, individuals who could enter the death state at will and return to tell of their experiences. Masters like Padmasambhava, who achieved what the Tibetans call the rainbow body, literally dissolving their physical form into pure light while maintaining complete awareness. Throughout the process, the great Tibetan master Milarepa, after decades of cave meditation, described death as the supreme opportunity for liberation, explaining that in those crucial moments when the ordinary mind dissolves, the clear light of primordial awareness becomes nakedly visible, offering every soul the chance for immediate enlightenment if they possess the knowledge and preparation to recognize it. The Egyptian pyramid texts, dating back over 4,000 years, describe identical stages of consciousness transition that parallel the Tibetan teachings with uncanny accuracy, speaking of the deceased pharaoh traveling through the duat, the intermediate realm between death and rebirth, where consciousness encounters various light beings and must navigate through chambers of judgment and purification. The Hindu Katha Upanishad tells us that when all the senses are stilled, when the mind is at rest, when the intellect wavers not, then is reached the highest state, describing the moment of death as the ultimate yoga, the final union where individual consciousness merges temporarily with universal consciousness before the karmic winds blow it toward its next incarnation. In the mystical traditions of Sufism, the great master Ibn Arabi wrote extensively about what he termed the greater death, explaining that physical death is merely a transition from one state of being to another, like awakening from a dream, and that the prepared soul experiences this transition as the ultimate spiritual ecstasy, a return to the beloved that makes all earthly pleasures pale in comparison. The Kabbalistic tradition speaks of the soul's journey through the four worlds after death: Ossia, Yetzirah, Beria, and Atzilut, each representing different levels of reality and consciousness that the departed soul must navigate according to its spiritual development and accumulated karma from all previous lifetimes. Modern near-death experience research, pioneered by Raymond Moody and later expanded by researchers like Kenneth Ring, Pim van Lommel, and Bruce Grayson, has documented thousands of cases where clinically dead individuals report remarkably consistent experiences that align almost perfectly with these ancient teachings, describing encounters with beings of light. Life reviews where every action and its consequences are experienced simultaneously, and journeys through realms of indescribable beauty and knowledge. The neuroscientist Eben Alexander, a skeptical Harvard-trained physician who experienced his own profound near-death journey during a week-long coma caused by bacterial meningitis, reported encountering what he described as the core, a realm of absolute unconditional love and infinite knowledge where he received direct understanding about the nature of consciousness and its continuation beyond physical death, completely transforming his materialist worldview and leading him to study the intersection between consciousness and quantum physics. According to the Tibetan teachings, the death process begins long before the heart stops beating, as the subtle energies that animate the body begin their gradual withdrawal from the extremities toward the heart center, a process that can take days or even weeks in some cases, during which the dying person may experience visions, encounters with deceased relatives, or spontaneous states of profound peace and clarity. The first bardo, called the Chikhai bardo or the moment of death itself, occurs when the grosser levels of consciousness dissolve and the clear light of the Dharmakaya, the fundamental nature of mind itself, becomes briefly visible to every human being regardless of their spiritual development, though only those who have trained extensively in meditation and death practices can recognize this light and merge with it permanently, achieving instant liberation from the cycle of rebirth. For most souls, this moment of opportunity passes unrecognized due to the shock and confusion of the death experience, and consciousness enters the second Bardo known as the Chonyad Bardo or the intermediate state, where the mental body experiences a series of visions and encounters that are actually projections of its own accumulated karma, thoughts, and unconscious patterns from the lifetime just ended and all previous lifetimes stretching back to beginningless time. The Tibetan texts describe in detail how consciousness in this intermediate state possesses what they call a mental body that has extraordinary abilities. It can travel anywhere instantly by mere thought, pass through solid objects, and perceive other mental bodies and beings, yet it cannot interact with the physical world and experiences intense longing to reconnect with material existence. The ancient Egyptian mystery schools taught their initiates a similar understanding through the elaborate funeral rites and mummification processes that were designed not merely to preserve the physical body, but to guide the Ka, soul, and Ba, personality, through their journey in the afterlife, providing detailed maps and incantations that would help the deceased navigate the challenges and temptations of the intermediate realm while maintaining awareness and purpose. The Hindu tradition describes this same intermediate state as the Antrabhava, literally meaning between existence, where the jiva, individual soul, carries with it the karmic impressions and tendencies that will determine its next incarnation, experiencing this state as either blissful or terrifying depending upon the spiritual development and moral actions of the previous lifetimes. The Sufi tradition teaches that the soul at death encounters what they call the barzakh, an intermediate realm between the physical world and the afterlife proper, where the soul experiences the consequences of its earthly actions and undergoes purification according to its level of spiritual development, with the saints and highly developed souls experiencing this as a garden of bliss while those who lived unconsciously experience it as a state of confinement and regret. Islamic mysticism describes the soul's journey through 7 levels of heaven and hell, each corresponding to different states of consciousness and spiritual development, with the ultimate goal being the soul's return to its divine source through the complete annihilation of the ego in the presence of Allah. Christian mystical traditions, particularly those found in Eastern Orthodox hesychasm and the writings of mystics like Meister Eckhart and John of the Cross, speak of the soul's journey after death as a process of purification and eventual union with God, where the prepared soul experiences death as the ultimate spiritual marriage, while the unprepared soul must undergo various stages of purification before it can approach the divine presence. The ancient Greek mystery schools at Eleusis taught their initiates about death through dramatic ritual reenactments of Persephone's journey to the underworld and return, revealing that death was not an ending but a transformation, and that those who died with knowledge and preparation would experience the afterlife as a realm of light and wisdom rather than darkness and confusion. The shamanic traditions found throughout the Americas, Siberia, and other indigenous cultures worldwide all speak of the soul's journey after death through various spirit worlds and levels of reality, with trained shamans serving as psychopomps or guides who help departed souls navigate these realms and avoid becoming trapped in lower vibrational states or confused intermediate zones. Modern quantum physics has begun to provide scientific frameworks that support these ancient teachings about consciousness survival, with researchers like Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose proposing that consciousness may be a fundamental feature of the universe itself rather than merely an emergent property of complex neural networks, suggesting that what we call individual consciousness might be localized expressions of a universal consciousness field that continues to exist even when the physical brain ceases to function. The Global Consciousness Project, conducted by researchers at Princeton University, has documented statistical anomalies in random number generators around the world that correlate with major global events and collective emotional states, suggesting that consciousness may indeed have non-local effects that transcend the boundaries of individual brains and physical bodies. Neuroscientist Mario Beauregard's research on the hard problem of consciousness has revealed numerous cases where brain activity alone cannot account for reported conscious experiences, particularly in near-death experiences where profound spiritual insights and accurate perceptions of remote events occur even when brain activity is severely compromised or completely absent according to medical monitoring equipment. The Tibetan teachings emphasize that the experience of death and the intermediate state is primarily determined by the individual's level of spiritual development, accumulated karma, and most importantly, their state of mind at the moment of death, which is why traditional Tibetan Buddhist practice includes extensive training in death meditation and visualization techniques designed to prepare the practitioner for conscious dying and navigation of the after-death states. The practice known as Phowa, literally meaning transference of consciousness, teaches advanced practitioners how to eject their consciousness from the physical body at will, practicing this technique thousands of times during their lifetime so that at the moment of death they can consciously direct their awareness toward liberation or at least toward a favorable rebirth. The great Tibetan master Longchenpa wrote that the Bardos are not places but states of consciousness, explaining that the same awareness that experiences waking, dreaming, and deep sleep states also experiences the Bardos of death, intermediate existence, and rebirth, and that understanding the nature of these ordinary states provides the key to mastering the extraordinary states encountered at death. According to these traditions, the third Bardo known as the Siddha Bardo or the becoming Bardo is where consciousness, driven by karmic winds and unconscious desires, begins to seek a new physical incarnation, experiencing powerful attraction to potential parents whose energy patterns match its own karmic propensities and unresolved psychological patterns from previous lifetimes. The ancient texts describe this process with remarkable detail, explaining how the disembodied consciousness observes potential parents engaging in sexual union and feels either attraction to the father and jealousy toward the mother, indicating male rebirth, or attraction to the mother and jealousy toward the father, indicating female rebirth. After which consciousness enters the womb and begins the process of creating a new physical vehicle for continued evolution and learning. The Hindu Garuda Purana provides similar descriptions of this rebirth process, explaining how the subtle body carries forward not only karmic impressions but also specific memories, talents, fears, and relationship patterns that will manifest in the new lifetime, which explains phenomena like child prodigies, innate phobias, and instant recognition between souls who have shared previous incarnations together. The key accounts of individuals who have experienced clinical death and return to tell of their journeys consistently describe encountering deceased relatives, spiritual guides, and beings of light who serve as helpers and teachers during the transition process, often providing information about the individual's life purpose, unfinished business, and future path that proves to be remarkably accurate when verified by subsequent life events. Dr. Jeffrey Long, who has collected and analyzed thousands of near-death experiences through his Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, reports that experiences frequently describe entering realms of learning where they receive teachings about the nature of reality, the purpose of life, and the interconnectedness of all beings, knowledge that often leads to profound positive changes in their values, relationships, and life priorities after their return to physical existence. Many near-death experiences report encountering what they describe as a council of beings or beings of light, who conduct a comprehensive life review where every action, thought, and emotion from the recently ended lifetime is experienced not only from their own perspective but simultaneously from the perspective of every person they affected, creating a complete understanding of how their choices rippled outward to influence the lives of countless others in ways they never realized during their physical existence. This life review process, described in virtually identical terms across different cultures and religious backgrounds, serves not as judgment or punishment but as education and understanding, helping the soul recognize the consequences of its actions and develop greater wisdom and compassion for future lifetimes or continued existence in non-physical realms. The Tibetan teachings emphasize that the intermediate state experience can last anywhere from a few moments to 4 to 9 days depending upon the individual's karmic patterns and spiritual development, with highly realized beings often skipping the intermediate state entirely and moving directly into their chosen rebirth or achieving complete liberation from the cycle of incarnation altogether. The practice of meditation, particularly mindfulness of death and impermanence, is considered essential preparation for this ultimate transition because it familiarizes the practitioner with the process of consciousness dissolution that occurs naturally during deep meditation states, making the actual death experience feel familiar rather than frightening when it eventually arrives. Advanced practitioners learn to maintain awareness even during the deepest states of sleep and unconsciousness, developing what the tradition calls clear light sleep, where consciousness remains luminous and aware even when the body and ordinary mind are completely at rest, providing direct experience of the type of awareness that continues beyond physical death. The ancient Egyptian initiates underwent ritual death and rebirth experiences within the Great Pyramid and other sacred sites, entering sarcophagi or special chambers where they would remain for 3 days in a state of suspended animation, their consciousness traveling through the afterlife realms while their physical body lay apparently lifeless, returning with direct knowledge of the soul's journey and the continuity of awareness beyond bodily existence. These mystery school initiations were considered the highest teachings available to humanity, reserved for pharaohs, priests, and the most dedicated spiritual seekers who had proven their readiness through years of preliminary training and purification practices designed to strengthen their ability to maintain consciousness during the most challenging spiritual experiences. The Hindu tradition describes similar initiatic practices where advanced yogis would enter states of suspended animation called samadhi, during which their breathing and heartbeat would virtually cease while their consciousness explored the highest realms of existence, sometimes remaining in these states for weeks or months before returning to share their experiences with disciples and seekers. The great yogi Paramahansa Yogananda, in his autobiography of a yogi, describes meeting several masters who had achieved conscious control over the death process, including his guru Sri Yukteswar, who appeared to him in a fully materialized body 6 months after his physical death to explain the nature of existence in the astral realms and the process by which advanced souls continue their evolution beyond physical incarnation. Modern research into consciousness and survival has produced compelling evidence that awareness can continue even when brain activity ceases, with documented cases of individuals accurately perceiving and later reporting events that occurred while they were clinically dead, including conversations among medical staff, procedures performed on their bodies, and details about other patients and locations within the hospital that would have been impossible to observe through normal sensory channels. Dr. Pim van Lommel's landmark study published in the Lancet followed cardiac arrest patients who experienced near-death experiences and found that these individuals showed significantly positive psychological changes years after their experiences, including reduced fear of death, increased spirituality, enhanced empathy, and greater life satisfaction compared to cardiac arrest survivors who did not report near-death experiences. The consistency of near-death experience reports across different cultures, ages, and belief systems strongly suggests that these are not hallucinations or brain chemistry artifacts but actual encounters with non-physical dimensions of reality that become accessible when consciousness separates from its physical vehicle, providing empirical support for the ancient teachings about survival and continuation of awareness beyond bodily death. The Tibetan tradition teaches that the moment of death offers the greatest opportunity for spiritual liberation that any human being will ever encounter, because in that instant when the ordinary conceptual mind dissolves, the fundamental nature of consciousness, described as luminous, aware, and beyond all limitations, becomes directly visible to every person regardless of their previous spiritual development or religious beliefs. However, recognizing this clear light of death and merging with it permanently requires extensive preparation through meditation, study of the death process, and cultivation of fearlessness and equanimity in the face of life's constant changes and challenges, which is why the tradition emphasizes that spiritual practice during life is actually preparation for conscious dying and ultimate liberation. The practice of Guru Yoga. The ancient texts warn that souls who die suddenly, violently, or in states of extreme emotional turmoil may become temporarily trapped in what are called hungry ghost realms or intermediate zones where they remain attached to their previous physical existence, unable to move forward in their spiritual evolution until they receive proper guidance or develop sufficient understanding to release their attachments and continue their journey. This is why traditional cultures have elaborate funeral rites, mourning periods, and ceremonies designed to help both the deceased and their surviving family members navigate the death transition with wisdom and grace, ensuring that the departed soul receives the prayers, offerings, and spiritual support needed to move forward rather than remaining bound to the physical realm through grief, guilt, or unfinished emotional business. The Sufi master Rumi wrote extensively about death as the ultimate wedding celebration, the moment when the individual soul finally returns to unite permanently with its divine beloved, describing the fear of death as the ego's last desperate attempt to maintain its illusory sense of separation from the infinite love and consciousness that is our true nature. The Christian mystic Meister Eckhart taught that God's ground and the soul's ground are one ground, suggesting that what we call individual consciousness is actually a localized expression of divine consciousness itself, and that death simply represents the moment when this truth becomes self-evident as all sense of separation dissolves into the recognition of our eternal unity with the source of all existence. The practical implications of these teachings for daily life are profound, because understanding the continuity of consciousness beyond death transforms how we relate to every aspect of our existence. Our relationships become opportunities for mutual spiritual growth rather than merely personal satisfaction, Our work becomes service to the evolution of consciousness rather than just career advancement. And our challenges become grist for the mill of awakening rather than obstacles to our happiness. The Tibetan practice of taking refuge in the three jewels, Buddha, enlightened awareness, Dharma, the teachings and natural law, and Sangha, the community of seekers, serves as preparation for the moment of death when these same three refuges will appear in the intermediate state as potential guides and protectors, helping the soul navigate toward liberation or at least toward circumstances conducive to continued spiritual development in the next incarnation. Advanced practitioners learn to perform what is called dream yoga, where they maintain continuous awareness throughout the sleep and dream states, recognizing dreams as mental projections and learning to navigate the dream realm with lucidity and intention, skills that directly transfer to navigating the after-death bardos, which are described as essentially similar to dream states but with much higher stakes and more vivid intensity. The ancient Egyptian concept of Ma'at, representing truth, justice, and cosmic order, describes the process by which the deceased soul's heart is weighed against the feather of truth in the hall of judgment. But esoteric interpretations reveal that this is not an external judgment imposed by divine authorities but rather the soul's own recognition of how its actions and motivations measured against the universal principles of love, wisdom, and service to the greater good. The Hindu concept of Dharma similarly suggests that each soul carries within it an innate understanding of right action and spiritual purpose that becomes clearly visible in the after-death state, allowing the soul to evaluate its recent lifetime and choose its next incarnation based on what lessons and experiences are needed for continued evolution toward eventual moksha or liberation from the cycle of rebirth altogether. The Kabbalistic tradition teaches that each soul originates from a specific sephira or divine emanation on the tree of life, and that all of its earthly incarnations represent attempts to fully embody and express that particular aspect of divine consciousness, with death serving as a return to its source sephira for rest, integration, and preparation for the next phase of its cosmic mission. Modern physics has discovered that energy can neither be created nor destroyed but only transformed from one state to another, providing scientific support for the ancient teaching that consciousness, being the most refined form of energy, continues its existence even when the physical vehicle that housed it ceases to function, perhaps transforming into more subtle energetic states that are currently beyond the detection capabilities of our scientific instruments but may eventually be measurable as our understanding of consciousness and quantum mechanics continues to advance. The work of researchers like Dean Radin at the Institute of Newtic Sciences has documented numerous cases of what appears to be consciousness-mediated effects on physical systems, including the ability of human intention to influence random number generators, plant growth, and even quantum mechanical processes, suggesting that consciousness may indeed be a fundamental force in the universe that can operate independently of biological neural networks. The ancient Vedic tradition describes the soul as being composed of increasingly subtle bodies: the physical body, the vital energy body, pranamaya kosha, the mental body, manamaya kosha, the intuitive body, vijnanamaya kosha, and the bliss body, anandamaya kosha, with death involving the sequential dissolution of these layers until only the most essential core of pure awareness remains, which then either merges back into universal consciousness or takes on new subtle bodies according to its karmic trajectory and spiritual development. The Tibetan description of the death process involves the dissolution of the five elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space, along with their corresponding sensory abilities and mental functions, creating a predictable sequence of experiences that trained practitioners can recognize and use as guideposts for maintaining awareness and directing consciousness toward liberation rather than unconscious rebirth. The dissolution of the earth element manifests as loss of bodily control and the feeling that the body is sinking or becoming impossibly heavy, while the dissolution of the water element involves loss of bodily fluids and the experience of everything becoming liquid or flowing, followed by the dissolution of fire, which manifests as loss of bodily warmth and the cessation of digestive processes, then the dissolution of air, which involves the cessation of breathing and circulation, and finally, the dissolution of space, which represents the collapse of ordinary conceptual awareness and the dawning of the clear light of death itself. Each of these stages offers opportunities for liberation if the dying person can recognize the process and rest in pure awareness rather than becoming frightened or confused by the dramatic changes occurring in their experience, which is why the tradition emphasizes the importance of having a qualified spiritual guide present during the death process to offer reminders and encouragement at crucial moments. The practice of Phowa or consciousness transference involves learning to eject awareness through the crown chakra at the moment of death, directing it either toward immediate liberation in the clear light or toward rebirth in a pure land where conditions are optimal for continued spiritual development under the guidance of enlightened teachers. Advanced Phowa practitioners develop the ability to create actual physical signs of their practice, including the appearance of a small opening at the crown of the head, the ability to insert grass blades or peacock feathers into this opening, and the emission of reddish fluid or even rainbow light from the crown chakra during practice sessions, providing tangible evidence that consciousness can indeed be directed and controlled through trained intention and visualization. The tradition teaches that the optimal time to practice Phowa is while healthy and mentally clear, because attempting to learn these techniques during the actual death process is extremely difficult due to the physical discomfort, emotional upheaval, and mental confusion that often accompany dying, making advanced preparation through daily practice essential for anyone serious about achieving conscious death and favorable post-mortem experiences. The Sufi tradition includes practices called latif points meditation, where practitioners learn to move their consciousness through 7 subtle energy centers in the body, developing familiarity with the process of consciousness migration that will occur naturally at death and gaining the ability to direct awareness toward union with divine consciousness rather than becoming scattered or confused during the transition. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, as recorded in Plato's dialogues, argued that philosophy itself is a practice of dying because it involves learning to identify with the immortal soul rather than the perishable body, and that the philosopher who has spent a lifetime cultivating wisdom and virtue actually looks forward to death as the moment when the soul will finally be free to pursue knowledge and truth without the limitations and distractions of physical existence. The Hermetic tradition teaches that the soul's journey after death involves passing through the 7 planetary spheres, each ruled by different cosmic intelligences that test the soul's development and either aid its ascent toward unity with the divine or require it to incarnate again at levels corresponding to its spiritual attainments and remaining karmic debts. Indigenous shamanic traditions worldwide describe the soul's journey after death as involving encounters with power animals, ancestral spirits, and guardian beings who serve as guides and teachers, helping the departed soul understand the lessons of its recent lifetime and prepare for its next phase of existence, whether in spirit realms or through reincarnation in physical form. The practical applications of this ancient wisdom for contemporary life include developing a regular meditation practice that familiarizes us with the process of consciousness withdrawal from sensory experience, cultivating equanimity and fearlessness in the face of change and uncertainty, studying the death process intellectually so that it becomes familiar rather than terrifying, maintaining ethical conduct and compassionate service that creates positive karmic momentum for the death transition, and most importantly, recognizing that every moment of life provides opportunities to practice dying consciously by letting go of attachment to outcomes, identities, and experiences that are ultimately impermanent. With loving souls encountering helpful guides and blissful realms while hateful or selfish souls experiencing frightening visions and challenging obstacles that reflect their own negative mental patterns and karmic accumulations. The tradition emphasizes that death is ultimately a solo journey that each soul must make alone, but that the spiritual connections and love developed during life create energetic links that continue beyond death, allowing departed souls to maintain contact with incarnated loved ones through dreams, meditation experiences, and subtle forms of guidance and protection that transcend the boundaries between physical and non-physical existence. Recent research in the field of mediumship and after-death communication has produced compelling evidence that consciousness can indeed communicate across the death boundary, with mediums providing accurate information about deceased individuals that would be impossible to obtain through normal means, including specific names, dates, personal characteristics, and private memories known only to the deceased and their surviving family members. Dr. Gary Schwartz's laboratory studies at the University of Arizona have documented numerous cases where skilled mediums demonstrate accuracy rates far exceeding chance probability when providing information about deceased individuals, suggesting that some form of consciousness survival and communication is indeed possible and that the ancient teachings about soul continuity may have a solid empirical foundation. The implications of consciousness survival for understanding the meaning and purpose of human existence are profound, because if awareness continues beyond bodily death, then our current lifetime represents just one chapter in an ongoing story of spiritual evolution and learning that extends across multiple incarnations and dimensions of reality, making every experience and relationship an opportunity for growth and service that ripples across eternity. The ancient wisdom traditions unanimously teach that the ultimate purpose of human existence is the evolution of consciousness toward ever greater expressions of love, wisdom, and unity with the divine source from which all souls originate and to which they eventually return.